Finishing a review on the performance we saw on our last episode, the Z490 Ace review, we had some questions. Not about the board though, the board was good.
Instead, it's about the classic Intel versus AMD question and what you should buy in 2020.
Also for Intel, we saw something, rendering 1080p versus 4K content in Premiere, something a lot of people are getting into as an alternate or even primary stream of income.
Today we'll do a CPU buying guide with motherboard chipset recommendations, then we'll get into some benchmarks.
So Intel versus AMD, what should you pick? Everyone has your favorite team you cheer on, and the decade-long underdog AMD coming out with a CPU that doesn't just try to compete with, but actually beats Intel CPUs on many benchmarks.
In addition, many board manufacturers offer AMD boards at a few dollars less than their Intel counterparts.
For me personally, my first computer was an AMD since Intel was out of my budget at the time, and then AMD for my next one too. It wasn't until I got to Asia and escaped the Canadian economy that I got an Intel i7, and at the time, Intel's performance for price was justified. But now Intel is having to directly compete with AMD, and no sir, they aren't playing fair, pulling some underhanded like this, link up here, with the launch of their Core i9-10980XE, designed to beat AMD release data to YouTube, so they didn't need to compete with their results. Also for Intel, up to their last 9th gen CPU line, they previously allowed consumers to overclock their RAM to the max the motherboard would support in BIOS. But suddenly, for their lower tiers, this has now been locked off. What the? This won't necessarily affect you unless you bought a RAM kit recently, but this is a dick move. Come on guys, really? We'll drop the related Intel articles into the description. Would you like to know more?
Today we'll give you a quick reference on motherboards for both AMD and Intel, as at Techspin our focus is on what's best for the consumer.
And no matter what you decide, if you grab a motherboard or CPU through our affiliate links below, it does help us out here, so thanks for your support.
And keep up with our latest releases and occasional contests by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Techspin Review.
So you ready to discuss some hardware?
Let's get to it.
The new FSP Hydro Pro G is reliable even in harsh environments. A compact, fully modular 80+ gold supply with dual ATX 8-pin, EcoSwitch, 10-year warranty, and it's perfect for your next build. Check it out at the link below. So first, a buying guide, then we'll get on to benchmarks, and this time we'll start with AMD. AMD has a few different chipsets that will support the new Ryzen 3000 CPUs, and we recommend a B550 or X570 current gen chipset for your motherboard.
Now we don't recommend the X470, B450 or older, as they use a PCIe 3.0 base with PCIe 2 for I/O connections to devices like USB and SATA, limiting speed.
For both B550 and X570, you get PCIe 4.0x16 for the PCIe, M.2 and DDR4 with AMD Crossfire and NVIDIA SLI support, and Gen 4 M.2 NVMe SSDs and USB 3.2 Gen 2. The difference for B550 is the PCIe 3 link to USB and SATA, which limit USB quantity and speeds depending on the manufacturer, though the matured VRM designs often match their higher-end X570 counterparts, starting around $110 to $120. X570 motherboards offer top-end connectivity due to the PCIe 4.0x4 link used for these subsystems, and it's the best platform for a Ryzen 9 3900 or 3950X CPU for productivity or rendering or ultra-quality gaming or streaming setups. If you want the best speed, then we recommend the X570 platform for AMD, and the boards are starting for $150 to $170. On to the current AMD CPU lineup. Using Cinebench R20 as a starting point, the Ryzen 7 3700X goes for $285 at the time of publication, scoring 4867 points. The Ryzen 9 3900X achieves a high bar of 7,021 points. That for a currently $430 CPU is actually more points per dollar spent, one of the first we've seen while doing reviews. Because PCIe 4.0 carries twice as much bandwidth, it's very attractive if you're considering an AMD Threadripper, delivering great performance without having to pay a premium that top-of-the-line CPU and motherboards carry. The 3950X handles up to 120 gigs of RAM at 3200 MHz, far more than most content creators will need. Hello, I need 128 gigs of DDR4 RAM right now. The top-end desktop 3950X at $690 scores 9,180 points in R20, which is 2,000 points up from the 3900X. It also somehow runs cooler than the 3900X by almost 10 degrees, with better power consumption, really amazing. Obviously, Cinebench isn't the definitive test, especially as it heavily benefits from more cores, something you won't notice typing in Word or surfing in Chrome, though if you're doing intensive CPU tasks, you will notice the difference here. We actually covered a great X570 board, check the link for that up here. And we usually recommend a beefy cooling solution for top-end chipsets, but with the Ryzen 9 series 3900 and 3950, you can actually get away with a 240 AIO liquid cooler solution if your primary focus isn't constant rendering. For more focused use, a 360 will see your Ryzen dumping heat very quickly with no issues.
Let's move on to Intel. They actually have 4 chipsets that work with their 10th generation CPUs, and none of the previous 100, 200, or 300 series will work as they're incompatible with the new CPU socket LGA 1200.
Yeah, that's true. If you want to overclock at all, get the Z490 chipset as Intel's locked out overclocking and high-end memory overclocking on lower boards. If you choose an H410, B460, or H470, then the DDR frequency is capped for i7 to i9 chips at 2933 and i3 to i5 to 2666 MHz. What's the difference between all the motherboard chipsets? Well, the H410 is bare bones with no overclocking, just 2 DDR4 slots, only 6 PCIe 3.0 lanes, no RAID, no USB 3.2 Gen 2, just 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1, no Optane, smart sound support or integrated wireless, and only up to 2 displays supported. B460 still has no overclocking support, but increases to 4 DDR4 slots, now has 16 PCIe 3.0 lanes, adds RAID, Optane and smart sound support, increases to 8x USB Gen 1 ports and 3 displays. It still has no USB 3.2 Gen 2 or wireless. The H470 still has no overclocking, but now has 20 PCIe 3.0 lanes, adding 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports and integrated Intel Wi-Fi 6. These motherboards start around the $120 to $140 mark. Finally, the Z490 chipset supports overclocking, increases PCIe 3.0 lanes to 24, also USB 3.2 Gen 2 goes to 6 ports, and 10 ports for Gen 1. With Wi-Fi 6, the Z490 is the only chipset that supports SLI, and these boards start around $160 to $190.
On to Intel's 10th generation CPU lineup, and we're looking at the i5 10400, the i7 10700K, and the i9 10900K. We're not choosing the F versions because they lack the onboard graphics chip, and with it gone, it also takes away QuickSync, important for streaming, encoding, and it shows a difference in Premiere too.
Starting with the i5 10400, it goes for 182 US, getting on the board with 3187 points in R20. Next we have the i7 10700K for $310, and at $49.85 it gets a 45% increase for 40% higher or $128 cost. This edges out the previous generation flagship 9900K by a bit, and coming in cheaper, it's not a bad deal. And our i9 10900K does $63.94 points for $470 US, a 33% performance gain over the 10700 for about $160 more. It's nice to see this 10th generation of Intel chips scale price with performance. We tested out the 10900K for our last episode, link up here, and what Intel got right is that the thermals at stock are very well controlled while still delivering a good result at stock. When you overclock this chip to 5.1 GHz with a decent 360mm AIO cooler like this MSI Core Liquid 360R, you get an improved result of 6578 points. Considering our 9900K did 4810 stock and 4869 at 5 GHz, the 10900 improves on the 9900K in every benchmark, shaving a full minute off in Blender's BMW and a surprising 4 minutes off in Classroom, all for just about $560 US. If you're working with Premiere, we actually saw something funky happen with our 1080p versus 4K content rendering. With CUDA off, our previous 2-minute, 26-second test file on our 9900K originally finished in 5 minutes 7 seconds. Today though, that render takes 5 minutes 15. The Intel security bug fixes evidently take a tiny hit on the speed. If it's something else though, let me know in the comments. The 10900 fresh install does 5 minutes 16, actually a hair slower, and this is rendered with Premiere CC 2019. 2020 adds 15 seconds to the render. However, doing 4K content, we're using exactly 10 minutes of our MSI GM30 mouse video, renders 13 minutes 29 seconds with a 9900K, and 12 minutes 25 seconds with the 10900K with CUDA off and using the H.264 YouTube 2160p preset. That's a minute faster, not bad. For HEVC or H.265 encoding, we tried both the default match source settings as well as the 4K UHD preset. The 9900K ran 2006 default and 2535 using 4K UHD, the 10900K turning in 1615 default, and 1934 with the 4K UHD preset. If you know what's going on here under the hood, I'd be interested to know. Please take a moment to like this video, and if you like what you see, then please do subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when I upload new content. So here's our AMD versus Intel showdown. Again, Cinebench isn't a definitive ranking, just an easy way to compare performance quickly between CPUs and tiers. So starting at the low end, the i5-10400 at 182 does 3187 in R20, facing off against the Ryzen 5 3600X at 210 for 3698 marks. The Ryzen 7 3700X at 285 gives us 4867 points, versus the i7-10700K at 310 US, finishing with 4985 points. PPD favors AMD here at both $25 less and more value for dollar spent at 17.1. The flagship i9-10900K at 470 gets 6394 points with a PPD of 13.6 against the Ryzen 9 3900X at 430 USD and 7021 marks, a delta of 2.7 points per dollar, so AMD claims this top tier hands down. Finally, the AMD 16-core flagship 3950X at $690 drops an astounding 9180 points in R20, even beating Intel's own 16-core 9960X at around $1,150 US, which comes in at 8275 points. By the way, the Ryzen 7 3700X is neck and neck with Intel's i9 9900K at 440, saving $155 for the same performance. Geesh, that Intel CPU dropped $130 from when we first bought it too. Buyer's remorse. One point to mention is that the X570 chipset for AMD requires active cooling for the PCI 4.0 chipset. This may be a consideration for some, but remember less than a decade ago we had those whiny Northridge fans? Sometimes you need active cooling. Anyways, no matter what team you cheer, our mission is to bring you the information so you can make informed decisions. Though, it's pretty clear if you want top level performance, AMD is the choice for the near future.
Thanks to MSI, whose test setup for our overclocking guide made extended testing and comparisons possible, something we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, and inspired this video.
So you're thinking about upgrading your rig. Will you be going with Intel or AMD? And what's your deciding factor? We want to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you found this video helpful. We really depend on your support, so please hit that subscribe button to keep new content coming. And be sure to click that bell icon to get notified when we put up a new video. We check the comments and try to respond to most, so if you have a question or if we missed something, then please do tell us down below. And let us know what you'd like to see next. We really appreciate you watching this far. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you on the next. Bye for now.